All right, in this lesson, we're going to look at parallels. And what are parallels? Why do we need to know about parallels? Why do we need to avoid parallels? Etc., etc., right? So parallels really, and I think I like the double L here, it's a good memory tool, really are parallel lines when you're drawing, or in terms of the visual communication of a piece, even the symbolic communication of a piece, parallels can also be parallel objects. For example, a character's standing and their arm position, even though it's at a 3/4 angle, their arm position is basically the same on both sides. This is a visual parallel. Sometimes this is called mirroring. And then parallels are also equal numbers of objects in a piece. So for example, you have a scene and there are some trees in the background. If you have two trees, that's considered parallel, and it just feels too balanced, and balanced in a bad way. It feels too engineered, right? So there's like sort of two trees in the background. And so what we want to be constantly doing in our work is making sure that we are breaking the parallels, right? So obviously, what is the opposite to a parallel? Well, it would be something that converges, right? And in this instance, where we've got these two lines next to each other that are quite parallel, the difference between this parallel and the converging lines is that the converging lines have a sense of directionality, right? They have a sense of directionality. Now, that's in terms of a literal parallel, where maybe you've drawn a leg, for example. Let's kind of imagine I'm drawing a leg here, and I've made the lines on both sides of the leg. Even though there's directionality in these lines, this is a literal parallel between the actual shapes, if you wish, or the lines, so that they're really mirroring each other and creating parallels. So this fits more into the mirroring category. Let's say here 1 is a literal parallel, literal. 2 is mirroring. And then 3 is, I'd say this is more symbolic. Okay, it is actually symbolic parallel. This is mirroring, although this is technically not literal mirroring, because literal mirroring would then be, a front view, and you have this really literal symmetry that you're seeing in the piece. Okay. Nevertheless, in general, I'm sure you'll start getting the idea of what a parallel is. Not just in character art, in all kinds of art. You have two mountains in the background of a piece, and, they're kind of dividing the page equally like this. Something like that. It's very distracting, too balanced, awkward, too engineered for the viewer. So we want to avoid parallels at all times. We hate parallels. Parallels must not be in our piece. Whether they're literal parallels, whether they're symbolic parallels. For example, another example of symbolic parallels is, let's say you're drawing a character and the character's wearing a shirt. And you might think, well, this is crazy. Like, how can he say what he's about to say? Well, you'll see. Let's say he's wearing a shirt here. It's a collared shirt. It's a nice collared shirt. And you're putting the buttons down the shirt. I'm saying definitely don't put 8 buttons. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, maybe 8's a little hectic. Let's bring that number down to 6, right? I would say definitely don't do 6 buttons. Do 7 or 5, right? Because odd numbers are more interesting, and because odd numbers can't be divided equally, they are not paralleling each other in a sense, right, in a symbolic way, and so the piece feels more natural. There's a saying, I don't know where the saying comes from, so I do apologize. There's a saying that goes, God doesn't draw in straight lines. So things that are natural, they just aren't straight, they aren't balanced, they aren't mathematically equal to them in the natural world, really. Everything was formed by natural ways, like in terms of the world and so on and so on. I mean, kind of what I mean to say is there was energy behind the formation of these things. And so things kind of, you look at mountains, and mountains are very random in a sense, although they have a sense of directionality to them, probably from the energy that formed them, but they are really kind of random. There's not like exactly 4 mountains. Now, of course, there are instances where there are exactly 4 mountains or exactly 2 mountains, and those are usually tourist destinations because it is unusual, right? It doesn't seem natural. It seems unnatural. And so there's an appeal in that sort of thing. But when we're trying to make a natural looking scene or a natural looking character, we want to avoid literal parallels. So we definitely don't ever want our arms or our limbs or clothing or anything to have literal parallels in it like this, right? And we definitely want to avoid mirroring. Why have both of the characters' arms down at the same angle? Why have the same pocket on both sides of a shirt? Etc., etc. I mean, you can really do that if you want to, but you have to ask yourself, does it feel too balanced? Does it feel too engineered? Or does it feel natural and cool, right? So we want to kind of change the arm direction, and instead of mirroring it, we have one arm kind of that way and maybe the other arm's reaching out for something, or on, it's on the hip or something like that. So, and this way we kind of achieve a nice natural feel. Okay, so this essentially is what parallels are. They're literal parallels, mirroring parallels, symbolic parallels, and the opposite to parallels really is asymmetry. We want asymmetry in everything that we're doing. And we'll look at asymmetrical shapes again later on. We have covered it a little bit. We'll look at it again later on, just to drive the point home of how much we need to avoid parallels in our work. All right, that's the end of this lesson.